Well, it's 10 o'clock, so we'll get started on time here. I'm Beth Brown, the CEO of the Community Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. And before we get started, just a note on technology and format, as we all have to do these days. This is a webinar rather than a regular Zoom. So what that means is that everyone is on mute and everyone is off video. So this is not as interactive a format as a regular Zoom. We wanted to do it this way so we could record it. We've got quite a few people who are unable to join but want to see the recording. So today is more educational and presentation in nature. That said, we really want it to be a teaser for more of a conversation with any of you. So please feel free to email me directly at ebrown@sonomacf.org. ebrown@sonomacf.org with any questions or comments that come up today. I can respond to you or put you in touch with the right person on our team to do so. We really hope that today's program inspires some of your thinking about your giving, especially as we start to think about giving in 2021. So you all have been invited here today because you've been generous enough at some point in time to be donors to the Sonoma County Resilience Fund. And just a little bit of background on the fund and where we are today before I turn it over to the important part of today, which is hearing from our nonprofits directly. So way back in 2017, after the Tubbs fire, within 48 hours of the fires, we set up the Sonoma County Resilience Fund for long-term recovery. At the time, we knew that there needed to be a source for a longer-term recovery and not just immediate relief. We also knew that the Tubbs fires were not going to be the only disaster that our community faced. That said, our team talked about setting up the Sonoma County Resilience Fund for the 2017 wildfires, and then the next major disaster, which we believed would be the responsibility of the next generation of Sonoma County staff and Sonoma County donors and Sonoma County nonprofits. But as you are all too aware, the 2017 fires were swiftly followed by floods, additional fires each year, and of course, this year, the pandemic. But the fund's purpose has remained really consistent and has evolved over time. We continue to raise funds for the Resilience Fund, and we see the need now as truly ongoing as these disasters become more common and more complex. A little bit of a background about how we arrived at our initial strategies, which we continue to invest in today. After the 2017 fires, we did a listening tour of sorts, and there were three priority need areas that became clear. One was helping individuals. That's helping individuals and families with financial assistance, with food, with basic human needs. That is really clear after any disaster. And now, of course, we're in an economic crisis where so many people have lost jobs or are temporarily unemployed. So that need remains constant. Healing community trauma. After the fires of 2017, we knew that there would be a PTSD-like impact for our community having gone through those fires. Indeed, not only has that happened, but with every following disaster, the extent of community trauma has become more and more dire. I'm sure you have felt it within your own circle of family and friends, especially during the pandemic and these most recent fires. And then the third area that was identified and has remained a consistent need is around solutions and housing for more affordable housing. So we're going to be highlighting those three areas today through our panelists. So we'll be highlighting these three areas in three nonprofit organizations, but by your investment in the Sonoma County Resilience Fund, you have played a role in providing nearly $12 million in grants to 145 nonprofit organizations. So I hope you can, in a time where all of the it's a shaky time in kind of every single aspect of living these days. And at times it can be really challenging to feel hopeful. I feel like at the Community Foundation, we don't have the luxury of being skeptics because we have your investment in so many people, generous donors like you, that we are making plans for the future and that we do feel hopeful every day by our interactions with you, one another, and especially the leadership of our nonprofit organizations who you're gonna hear from today. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague, Ariana, who is a pivotal leader in so many of our strategies in the Resilience Fund and beyond. And Ariana is going to facilitate our panel discussion today. And then I will see you again on the other side of the panel. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Beth. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ariana Diaz de Leon. I am the Community Impact Officer at Community Foundation Sonoma County, and it's my honor to be the moderator today for our nonprofit panel. And at this time, I am going to ask our three panelists to turn their videos on. And before I introduce them, I do just want to note that one of the things we've learned about disasters is that those that were already vulnerable prior to the disaster are the ones that are going to have a harder time recovering. So there were disparities that existed in our community even before the Tubbs fire, and they've only been exacerbated. So for that reason, the Resilience Fund was established with equity in mind and to support the most vulnerable people in our community, the families, the individuals who were already struggling to make ends meet prior to the disasters and who now have that many more challenges in order to achieve a healthy, safe, and stable life in Sonoma County. So all three of our panelists here today are representing organizations that were established with support from the Resilience Fund, but that have been working towards creating a more equitable community, either through helping, healing, or housing. So first, I would like to introduce America Rosales Orozco, Disaster Case Manager at ROC Sonoma County, or Rebuilding Our Community, and now Disaster Relief Program Coordinator at Community Action Partnership. And over the past few years, America has helped countless families and individuals that have been impacted by disasters, and that includes helping them with processing applications for rental deposits to working alongside homeowners and renters who lost everything. And so she's really had life-changing impacts on so many. The organization that she is representing, ROC Sonoma County, is a coordinated effort developed after the Tubbs fire by a network of nonprofits, funders like ourselves, faith-based organizations, government agencies, all to address the long-term recovery needs of survivors. Thank you for being here, America. I'd also like to introduce Javi Cabrera Rosales, Project Director for La Plaza, Nuestra Cultura Cura, or Our Culture Heals. Javi is also the Project Director for Cura, COVID-19 Urgent Response Aid, which is an effort that La Plaza is currently leading. And Javi was part of the first cohort of On the Verge Sonoma, which is a year-long leadership intensive that creates a pipeline of Latino leaders in Sonoma County. This was implemented by On the Move and supported through Community Foundation's Latino Leadership Fund. And this is the cohort that sparked the idea for combating issues of stigma, access, culture, and language through the creation of a Latino community center. And La Plaza is Latino-led, it's Latino-designed, and it's a healing initiative that emphasizes the use of cultural strengths to reduce mental health stigma and to leverage the collective action of the On the Verge graduates. Welcome, Javi.
Gracias.
And finally, I'd like to introduce Jen Close, who's Executive Director of Generation Housing. Jen practiced real estate law in Sonoma County for 15 years before she became the founding director for Gen H. And as a lawyer, Jen facilitated the conversion of the Palms Inn into permanent supportive housing for homeless veterans and vulnerable civilians. She served 2 terms on the Santa Rosa City School Board with 3 years as its board president. and is active in local community leadership. And Gen H was incubated with funding from the Resilience Fund and is taking a comprehensive approach to consensus building, education, and advocacy around housing. I want to say welcome to all three of our panelists. We're looking forward to a really great conversation with all of you. And we're going to begin with America to take a deeper dive into the impact of ROC Sonoma County. So over the course of 3 years, ROC Sonoma County has helped over 1,200 individuals. And these are survivors from the fires in order to recover and to rebuild. And some survivors just needed a little bit of help with rent payments or with access to groceries or food, while others needed more intensive case management to be able to rebuild their homes and their lives. So we know that you, as a disaster case manager, have spent time with many, many families and have been an integral part of their recovery stories. But sometimes, in order to really see the impact of ROC Sonoma County, it helps to look at the story of just one client. So could you share with us the story of one client that had particularly resonated with you?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Like Ariana mentioned, my name is America, and I've been a case manager for the last 2.5 years with TUF survivors. Last year, a woman came to us seeking rental assistance because her ALE, or additional living expenses that an insurance pays after a disaster, was running out. And at that time, she needed to pay not only her mortgage, but also their rental while they were waiting for their home to get rebuilt. This lady was in her late 50s, and she's monolingual, Mexican woman, who was just, along with her husband, stuck in a routine of working to be able to pay, again, their mortgage, their living expenses, and on top of that, their rental. They were sharing a rental because they couldn't afford the rent on top of their mortgage. And as I started talking to her, I realized that she needed more support. She was not just there to get rental assistance for a couple of months. The more I asked questions, the more I realized that they were basically clueless as to what they were doing in terms of the rebuild. They had paid their contractor for them to rebuild their house, but only the foundation was done, and many months had gone by with no progress whatsoever. And so the more I asked, the more I realized that she had no idea where even the insurance money was. She had no idea where it was coming from, who it was going to. And again, she was frustrated because only the foundation of her house was built. And again, this was during summer. Many months went by. I told her about disaster case management and long-term support. She seemed a bit skeptical about it. I told her that eventually, if she needed more funds, we could present to be able to complete her home. And again, there was that sense of like, this sounds too good to be true. That was summer. Many months passed, and we have a process where we have to close clients if they're not in touch with us. But there was something in my heart telling me that I could just not let this client go, because I could see it in her face, beyond stressed out. Again, many months went by, I think it was at the end of the year in 2019, and I still had not heard from her. And so finally, after many calls, I realized that she was also very technologically limited. She didn't know how to access voicemails. She didn't know how to get in touch with me. And she was just stuck in this routine of going to work, doing extra hours just to get extra income to be able to afford everything. So finally, I was able to convince her and her husband to take time off to come and sign on to DCM. They did. They signed all the paperwork. I started collecting everything that we needed to collect to ensure that these clients were going to receive funds and they actually needed them. That was a big thing for me. I wanted to always ensure that the money was going to people that truly needed it. So after I did all that process and I realized that they needed help, they were in money to be able to complete, they weren't going to have enough because so much time had gone by, prices had gone up, materials were in shortage, and there was just no way that they were going to have enough to complete the house. So once I signed them up and everything, we got the ball rolling. My coworker, Wade Annaluz, which is the construction liaison, was able to gap the bridge and communication between the contractor, the insurance company and also the mortgage company who held the money. What we found out with this case was that the initial mortgage was actually sold to another company. So during that transition, again, the money was kind of lost. No one really knew where it was. So it took, again, a lot of weeks, a lot of phone calls, a lot of, signing of releases so that we were able to speak for this family. Because again, they were monolingual. They didn't, if it's difficult to do in English, I can't even imagine how much more difficult it is not knowing the language. And so Wade was able to help myself and these clients with that gap in communication. Eventually this year, right before COVID, I started working on the report to be able to present this case to the Unmet Needs Committee, which was a committee created within ROC to give larger amounts of funding for clients who had lost their homes. For this particular family, we were asking for funding to complete the home and also to give them a little bit of a breather in terms of the rent that they had to pay, so that they could focus on their mortgage rather than both at the same time. That was approved, and it was very exciting. The unfortunate part about this this story was that the last time I saw my client, she told me about how stressed she was, and I could see it in her face. And she told me how she couldn't take time off, and her doctor had already told her that she needed to take more care of her health because he was starting to see things that he didn't like. And so I told her too, I was like, now that everything has been sort of, that I'm going to present it for you, I want you to really take care of your health. Because this lady never cried in front of me. And for me, like, I could just feel that energy of stress. And to me, it was very surprising that someone wouldn't open up to me like that. Like I said, this was right before COVID. COVID hit, there was a different approach to everything that we were doing. We had to present it in the same manner, Zoom, emails. And this was in May of this year. And in May, I got the email saying that they had been approved and that the check was going to get written. And I was really excited to tell my clients that when I received a phone call, and it was a phone call from one of their daughters. And she told me that my client actually passed. She had a stroke in her bathroom right before she was to go to work. And I get very emotional every time I tell this story. I'm sorry if I shed a few tears, but I was supposed to give good news and I received terrible news. Obviously, like I said, I do feel in my heart that the stress that this woman went through, not being able to let it out, had a huge component as to why she ended up passing. I'm not done with this case. They are supposed to complete the home at the end of this month, if not at the beginning. So I'm crossing my fingers that at least her husband is going to be able to have their rebuilt home. They worked really hard to have that. Latinos, work extra hard. They don't come out and specifically say that they need help. They only do it when there's absolutely no more resources for them within their own families or within their own circle. Like I said, I could see it in her face, and it took a little bit of trust. It took a lot of time for me to convince her that we were there for her and to help her out. And I'm just hoping that wherever she is now, she's able to see the end result of all the effort, not only through your funding, but all the time and all the passion that we as workers put behind this case. And that's just like, Ariana, you said it's just one example of all the families that I was able to help, but that also touched me while I was working with them during this very difficult time in our community.
Thank you so much, America, for sharing that story that's difficult to hear. And I can only imagine what it's like to be a case manager, become close with these individuals, see them at their most vulnerable, going through so much loss, and then they experience this additional incredible loss. So thank you for sharing that and for the work that you do. And it is really important to remember that recovery has to take place at the pace of the survivor. Some of them might not be ready to access support until later down the line for cultural reasons, for personal reasons, for psychological reasons. So we really have to be there for them whenever they are ready. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. We're going to come back to you at the end with a final question, but I do want to turn it over now to talk about healing, because this is a great transition to speak about the Latino community specifically, and how everyone experiences trauma after a disaster, but some individuals have less access to resources and to help that is culturally relevant and that is available to them. So Javi, I want to open it up to you now to talk about La Plaza. What is La Plaza and why is the approach to healing so unique?
Thank you, and thank you all for having me. Please excuse my voice. I've been talking a lot in the last several months, and so it's catching up to me. I'm really excited to be here to just share a little bit about La Plaza and the work that we're doing in this moment in time. La Plaza, Nuestra Cultura Cura, Our Culture Heals, was created to address what we knew in Sonoma County and many other counties, and probably across the United States in different communities that are really focused or highly populated with Latinx individuals. That the access to mental health or health resources can be extremely challenging for many reasons. One, asking for help is a huge thing. And as America just shared, that there are challenges in folks actually coming forward to address their own health. And where to find those resources, trusting those resources, be able to actually serve them in the way that they need. And so La Plaza grew out of this idea of, okay, we know that in Sonoma County, we have therapy, and we also have aspects of medication for folks that are higher level of need for mental illness. And so processing through that, we said, yes, we know that that makes up a percentage of individuals within our community, but there's a huge scope of folks that are dealing with day-to-day struggles, which could be high stress levels, anxiety, bouts of depression, depending on certain situation, whether that's family, whether that's coming from a different country to the United States, the transition, depending on your legal status in the United States, could all have components and pressure on our mental health, which then we know directly impacts our physical health. And so it was on the verge that I was first a participant and then moved into coaching and have been through that whole process after 3 years, transitioned into my position as director of La Plaza, and here today. And that first year cohort, we sat in a circle. I remember it was at Bodega Bay. After 6 months of being together, we had a retreat for 3 days being together. And we all sat in a circle and we shared some really deep things about our own struggles with mental health, and challenges of some folks coming to this country and the impact that's had on them, but also their family. And through that process, we asked a very simple question of, well, how did you actually get through that? Like, what were some of the things that you did that allowed you to overcome, and maybe still are overcoming, but still using tools or ways to do that? And so we went around the circle and folks were saying food and community and convivencias, gatherings, music, dance, gardening, creating. Many different ways of art were incorporated around. Some folks were talking about clay making, other folks were talking about painting. And so there was this epiphany and a reality that we all knew that we were holding inside, that our culture, our family, our generations of our ancestors have provided many different ways of healing. And it's just not necessarily recognized within our community, at least within the county and many other places, that this is actually a form of healing, that this actually is a way that we can address the challenges around mental health and us accessing mental health. Because the language we're speaking is not, hey, let's go to therapy. That already creates a challenge, right? Because there's so much stigma behind that. But if we could reframe it to saying, did you know that, art and also dance and the things that you already do are forms of healing? When you cook together, when you eat together, when you come together, how does that actually make you feel? And so the uniqueness of La Plaza is that we didn't want to recreate the wheel of things that were already present in community. So we paired both the organizations and agencies that were already doing mental health work and saying that Western medicine and therapy are essential and we can address to help break down that stigma. And also saying that people in our community already know traditional and non-traditional ways of healing. And if we can create a space where those things could coexist, then we can start to really bridge this gap of what it really means to address mental health, and even switch the language that maybe it's not mental health that we should even be using. That language itself really doesn't allow us to acknowledge the beauty of true healing and finding different ways to access that. The last component that I really want to share is that we don't create it. I have my own ways of healing, and sometimes I do dance at La Plaza, and that's one of my ways of healing that I offer. But we actually call upon folks in community to bring their healing form or their art form to La Plaza, and then we help to break down the barriers of access. So if we want to make sure that they're compensated for their work, we want to make sure that if we can provide any sustainability for that to be consistent, we do that. Childcare for people to actually access those services, to actually go through that, we provide childcare. Alongside that, food is always something that we're always kind of providing because it's an essential part of us gathering together. But ultimately, it's individuals in community that are providing the actual direct service to other people in community. So truly, it is a development of all of us coming together to provide something to find our own modalities of healing.
Thank you, Javi. And that last component is so important because it's part of building the trust with the community. So it's by allowing them in, whether it's virtually or in person, you know, it's bringing in their culture and whatever they feel is what brings them healing. So that's part of building the trust. And we just have a few minutes left before we transition over, but I do want you to talk about the Cura project for just a moment and about how that trust has allowed La Plaza to then be leading Cura during this pandemic.
Yeah, so Cura, in just brief, is a direct response of a collaboration with many different organizations, CAP Sonoma and Via Esperanza, one of our family resource centers in Santa Rosa, and many other family resource centers are doing case management to provide direct emergency financial assistance to individuals that are having to isolate or quarantine in Sonoma County. The reason all of this kind of came together is that the spikes of numbers and percentages of individuals actually testing positive and also dying of COVID-19 in Sonoma County was exponentially high. And it's something that's happening in other counties as well. People of color and also specifically here, the Latinx and indigenous communities were the most impacted. One, because most of our folks are essential workers and providing work in the fields and agricultural work, and also factories and many other places where there's close contact. And so our efforts were to be able to bring together already our built relationships and trust within community to then address this as a collective, not as an individual entity, as La Plaza, but Cura is a collaboration between 15 plus community-based organizations, organizer and activists, to be able to come together to provide direct service. Not only just emergency financial assistance, but resource navigation, as well as outreach and community engagement. And so our efforts are also at the forefront of providing the awareness and education and access to where to get these resources to our community. So we're meeting them where they're at, as well as providing some of the direct services that we can, and then navigating them to other organizations within our bubble for additional resources. And it's really important for me to share this, is that without funding and now without funders like you all, that we from on the verge, from this small cohort that we didn't know what we were going to do, to 5 years later to where we're at now, of so many young and emerging and elder leaders, Latinx leaders, are providing this direct service and a huge response to something that's impacting all of us in Sonoma County. So
That's,
thank you.
that's a really great point, Javi. And thank you so much for sharing not only about La Plaza and the healing approach, but also the Cura project and the whole path that has taken place from On the Verge's initial vision to where you are now. So thank you for that. And with that, I do want to transition over to our final panelist, Jen Close. So when it comes to housing, we already knew that just to build one unit, it takes around $600,000 at least. And with over 5,000 homes being lost in Tubbs, even if we used all of the Resilience Fund just to build, we wouldn't be able to build more than a couple dozen homes. So with housing, we had to look at where we could leverage additional dollars to have that greater impact. And Generation Housing is an innovative housing project that looks to advocate and increase the amount of funding that's here in our community to be able to do just that. So Jen, I want to turn it over to you to share with us what's the organization's purpose and what impact will it have on our community?
Thank you, Ariana, and thank you so much just for including me in this group. And it's great to hear about this important work that's going on. So I think to talk about the purpose and the impact, it's important to start about sort of where we came from. So, you know, in the year after the fire, I was serving as St. Andrews School Board president, and I was invited to every meeting because we had this tremendous loss in our school community. 900 students lost their homes, 100 teachers. But at every single meeting, no matter who convened it, no matter what it was about, no matter what we were supposed to be, no matter what we planned to talk about, we ended up talking about housing because it was a crisis before the fires, and the fires just exacerbated it. And the housing was really at the center of, you know, making progress, or the ability to make progress in all these other areas in health and education and our environmental concerns, our local economy. So it was all about housing. And then at the same time, Community Foundation, you know, generously hired an expert to sort of ask the question, what are the solutions to this long-standing housing crisis? What are the barriers and what are the possible solutions? And she really came up with two answers. And the one is around funding and increasing funding, because our math here is difficult, and I'll talk more about that later. But the other one was, we have to increase political and public will. We need an independent housing advocacy organization here that's sort of modeled after organizations that exist other places and have really had significant impact in housing crunched areas. So we're really determined to move the needle on our housing crisis, and to do that through an equity and environmental lens.
And what successes are you seeing at this point, Jen?
Well, I think we really hit the ground running and have I think, seen some great successes that I'm excited to talk about. I will tell you it's super wonky and complicated. So I'll try to kind of do it quickly and as simply as possible. But the first thing is around this disaster tax credit funding. And you might have read about it in the paper, but you know, affordable housing is financed by this really complicated process through federal tax credits. And it is a competitive system, and it always disadvantages smaller jurisdictions like ours. But the end of 2019, Congressman Thompson advocated for a $100 million increase in the tax credits available for wildfire impacted areas. And $100 million, it's a 10-to-1 difference, is $1 billion in housing funding. So we're talking about really big money. And out of the disaster impacted areas, we were in Sonoma County suffered almost 22% of that damage. Most of the damage was in Butte County with the Camp Fire, but 22% was here in Sonoma County. And in January, when we were brand new, like a week old, the allocation regulations were announced through the state of California. And those regulations would have given us only $12 million. And they would have given us only $12 million if we successfully competed against LA and Orange County. And so it was really likely that we were going to get zero out of money that was supposed to be for us. So we really mobilized in that first month and then over the next few months to advocate to make sure we got our fair share. And at the end of the day, we did lead an effort here locally where we ended up with about $25 million in tax credits. So more than we were even aiming for at the beginning, which is going to equate to 420 plus or minus affordable housing units. So 420 units, which as you mentioned, is real expensive at $600 a unit. So that's a real leveraging of your money. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is this advocacy we've done around PG&E funding. The Renewal Enterprise District, and here's another kind of wonky thing, is this is this innovative joint powers authority between the County of Sonoma and City of Santa Rosa. And then in December, it's going to open up to the other jurisdictions in Sonoma County. But it was created to help solve the math problem. And the math problem here is that it is just as expensive to build in Sonoma County as it is anywhere, as it is in San Francisco. But our rents are not as high. And so the projects don't pencil. So all these big projects that are just right on the cusp have a funding gap. So the red is trying to increase funding. And one of the things that it did, and also this was with some seed funding from the Community Foundation, was it started a local housing fund using a national advisor on housing funding, Forsyth. But this fund needs seed funding. It needs seed funding so then it can get conventional funding, but so that these developers can get below market interest rate loans. It's a revolving fund and fill these funding gaps and get these projects over the finish line. So it needed $20 million to get going. So we said at Generation Housing, we're going to talk to the county and the city and say, we need some money from PG&E. After the fires, the county did a resilience, recovery and resilience framework that was informed not just by the experts, but also by the community. And that said that we have 5 priorities. And the first one is, of course, fire mitigation and prevention. But the second one is housing, and not just replacing lost housing, but investing in our future by investing in affordable housing. So we said to the county, and we got a lot of cross-sector support from our community leaders, if you want to invest this money, if you want to turn it into more than it is, then you invest in housing. Give us the housing we need. And at the same time, infuse some cash into this community, because it's a great cash infusion to be building housing. So we did, successfully advocate for the county to invest $10 million in this red housing fund if contingent, and I think this is great, the city meets them, City of Santa Rosa meets them, and all signs point to that the City of Santa Rosa will meet them in that effort. So that was great. And then I don't know how much time I have yet left, Ariana, but I can talk about some research we did too, if I have time.
Sure, you have a couple minutes, Jen.
All right, thanks, Ariana. So the other thing that we found out at the beginning was that our housing staff locally in all the jurisdictions, they're so busy that they don't have any time to do research. They said to us, they don't even have any time to stay up on best practices in planning and zoning and these things. They have no time. And so they're not making data-driven decisions around funding for housing. And so that's something that we have taken on, and our great policy and advocacy director, Jesus Guzman, is not just, he is an MPP, and he's also an economist. And so he's building a research team of PhD candidates and MPP second-year students from Berkeley who are doing real research. And one of the things he did, and you can find it on our website, was a rent shortfall report that was done in conjunction with New York University. And that was the report that the county relied upon to determine what kind of rental assistance it needed to provide during this pandemic. So we're going to continue to try to do this kind of research so that we make really data-driven decisions, and we're smart with our money and making sure to leverage money around housing.
Thank you so much, Jen. And it's really incredible to see how the Resilience Fund investment was able to leverage additional funding and also set you up to do that research and bring in that data that is so needed in our community. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. I do want to turn it over to all of the panelists now for a final question about what comes next for your organization, what comes next for your programs. We know that in the next year, COVID is still here. We know that we still are recovering from disasters, and we don't know what's to come. So I'd like to know what comes next. And I'm going to start with America. And for you, we can say, what comes next for disaster relief or preparedness?
Thank you, Ariana. Well, in terms of rebuilding our community or ROC, I think that program is potentially going to end for the 2017. But for at least for Community Action Partnership, we've talked about how having a program in place when a disaster hits is essential. We were recovering from 2017, and in 2018, luckily, I don't think we really had any major disasters that impacted this area, but then the West County flooding occurred, and Community Action was ready and received funding from Community Foundation, and I believe Kaiser as well, to be able to distribute funds for families and individuals that were affected then. And again, this, happened fairly quickly because we knew the process. We knew what paperwork to ask for, what the need was going to be. And then Kincaid occurred as well. And again, we were able to mobilize, and initially we did gift cards. And then, the fires that occurred this year, and along with the pandemic. So with all that said, I think for us, it's imperative that we have a program in the community where the community can turn to at any time, and we're able to mobilize almost immediately. If my program goes away and something else happens, we're not going to have to recreate the wheel, but not having the manpower ready to go when something strikes, would set us back a few weeks, potentially months, in order for us to be able to give that assistance clients need right away. I mean, like Javi mentioned, having food, access to be able to pay your rent, to be able to pay your utilities. Those are the immediate needs that we see after a disaster hits. So I think just having something in place where the community can turn to, I'm hoping that we're able to keep that for many years to come.
And America, thank you for that. You mentioned not having to recreate the wheel, and you, as a disaster case manager at ROC, now you're at Community Action Partnership, doing similar work. Do you think that what we've learned from those initial disasters is being applied now for what's happening currently and for what's to come?
Absolutely. Community Action, I believe, was one of the first agencies that received funding to help with COVID. I remember COVID hit, and it was a Monday when they were told us that everything had to close. And I believe the following week, we were already having checks and gift cards being distributed for families that knew that they were not going to be able to pay the rent at the end or at the beginning of April, because they were going to be out of work for 2 weeks or more, or, unknown. They didn't know when they were going to go back to work. And just like Jen Close mentioned, we live in a county that is super expensive when it comes to housing. So we have these families that are just being able to afford their monthly needs. And so when something like COVID happens, where they don't know where they're going to get the money from, they don't have an emergency saving funds, the balance just tips over right away. And so, like I mentioned, having something in place, I think, is very important for those people in our community that are just on the verge of, potentially becoming homeless or not having enough at the end of the month for their own families.
Thank you so much, America. And Javi, I'm going to turn that question to you now. What's next for La Plaza in the coming year?
Sustainability is probably one of the main things that come to my mind. Not sustainability in just funding. I'm really talking about the sustainability of trust, and also the growth and building of a unified Sonoma County, where, as America is sharing, is that when things actually happen during emergencies and disasters, and not during emergencies and disasters, we're unified, in the sense that if there is support that's needed, we have now a webbing, and I think Cura is in that process, and many other people have already been doing this work. And the challenge is that sometimes it's really been in silos. And so really breaking down the barriers around silos and agencies and organizations of working separately to a position where we can bring a little bit from each place to be able to hold and create a bigger and a more sustainable netting, that when this does happen, or when disasters are happening, that we're able to really hold people and get them back to that recovery space, along with their own resiliency and the resiliency that we can provide. Also moving along the pendulum to breaking down more of the stigma around mental health. We're in the process of working on completing an innovations grant, so that we're able to continue, at least for the next 3 to 5 years, to implement more of the community collaborative to inform us about what mental health is for us, and then how do we change the language and the practices to be able to be implemented within our actual systems to provide across the county. So continuous sustainability, and also that building of trust and partnership.
Thank you so much, Javi. And we know that healing takes time. And it's something that we need in our community for the long term. So it's definitely something that we need continued investment in. Jen, I'm turning it over to you for that final question. What's next for Gen H? What do you see in the coming year?
Thank you, Ariana, so much. We're super excited about the opportunities to advocate for more housing at both the state level and the local level. And you know, at the state, we have to continue this effort to make sure that we get our fair share of funding all the time. We have never had a presence at the state, and there's a lot of money for housing, but a lot of it is going to Southern California. And so right now we are going to step up our local effort to make sure that that funnel starts coming this way. And also that we continue to focus on this RED fund. I can tell you 3 projects that are shovel ready right now that are in total about 500 units, and they just have small funding gaps that we can get done with this RED funding. And we can also advocate for great policies that accelerate development, but without hurting folks and displacing folks, or you know, with some real good anti-gentrification policies. So we're going to do all that advocacy, and but to do that, we kind of have 3 categories. We engage, we convene, and we educate. And it's educating staff and electeds. That's where we're doing this research, and then also some Housing 101 trainings, because housing is super complicated. We're educating the public through our webinars. We have one tonight around health and housing. You can look at our website and sign up, it's free. And we're engaging folks to come out and really speak out to say that we need housing. And one of the ways I think we're going to focus on engaging this coming year is with young people. Young people are afraid about their future here in Sonoma County, and they're leaving, and they're right to be afraid. They don't see themselves here. They can't afford it. And the data shows that there's a real strong voice in that. And so we're going to engage those young folks and teach them about housing and teach them how to advocate for themselves, which is also, I think, going to teach them how to advocate for themselves around all things, not just housing, but we'll of course focus on housing. And then convening, you know, we have right from the start been convening across the board, cross-sector community leaders to say, housing is all of our concerns and they agree, but we need to start aligning actions. For a long time, there have been organizations and folks working at cross purposes. We have a lot of kind of old political divides, and we are really working to kind of heal those and to bring people together and to create ways, really practical ways to align in support of housing. One of the real feathers in our cap, I think, is that we did an advocacy effort that included a proposal and a letter where we had NBOP signing on and the California Apartment Association and NORBAR signing on. And this has never happened ever. This is, you know, sort of across the board support for something. And we're going to continue to try to create those opportunities to collaborate both cross-sector and also cross-jurisdiction between cities and counties.
That's so fantastic, Jen. And it's great to hear that you're looking at engaging young people into learning about the complex system of housing, because they're the ones that will then step in to be leaders in the future. And we want them to have what they need to make those right decisions. For folks that want to tune in to the housing webinar later today, what's the Generation Housing website?
Thank you. It's generationhousing.org. And you'll see that and a lot of other events coming up, and they're all free and all translated.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our panelists today for coming on board, talking to us, sharing the impact that you're already seeing. It's fantastic to have you here, and we're grateful for all the work that you do. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth Brown for the closing.
Well, thanks to all of you. And I think one thing that's challenging about this format is you cannot either hear or see our, gratitude, but I think everyone at home is cheering you on as well. And I hope everyone, listening, I mean, nonprofit leaders are my heroes. And I think these are 3 such great examples of leadership and of both the wisdom and the heart that you lead with and the innovation. I mean, to think that these 3 organizations did not exist prior to these disasters. So if there are, bright spots, I think the birth of these organizations and the great work they're doing is one of them. And I hope you can feel great pride that by investing in the Resilience Fund, you are investing in a cohort of organizations and leaders. These are 3 examples, and there are many others. as I was thinking, we learned in 2017 when we were consulting with other organizations and communities that had gone through disasters, that you have a different sense of time when you're going through a disaster. And I know for me, especially this year, and we've all experienced this with the pandemic, I feel like my relationship with time goes from the very immediate and urgent, like that I can't see beyond the next 10 minutes, to the weightiness of history and thinking about what we know this is an historic year we're in, and what is the legacy that this year is going to leave. And as I was listening to our speakers today, I was thinking about the legacy of grief and the legacy of love. And this, I'm going off script here, but as I was thinking about that, I was reminded of a poem, and thanks to Google, I was able to find it. And I found perspective and comfort in recent months, looking at the words of historians and at the words of poets. They've helped give me perspective of the times we're in. So I thought I would read this poem by Ellen Bass. It's called The Thing Is. To love life, to love it even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you've held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands, your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat, thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weights you down like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief, you think, how can a body withstand this? Then you hold life like a face, between your palms, a plain face, and you say, yes, I will take you, I will love you again. At its core, philanthropy is a love story. It is, by definition, the love of humanity. And I truly believe that what our community goes through is falling in love with each other again and again, as challenging as it is. And I do hope that that's the legacy, not just of our organization, our community, but of our country during this time, that our children and grandchildren will be flattened by the knowledge of our grief and inspired by the capacity of our love. So I just want to thank you again for your partnership with us, and that it is no less than an expression of love when you contribute to any nonprofit organization and partner with us in your philanthropy and make a contribution to the Sonoma County Resilience Fund. We are in this for the long haul. We know the disasters will evolve. Our strategies will as well. We are grateful and proud of the $12 million nearly that we've invested in the community. It is sadly a drop in the bucket compared to the need today and in the years to come. We are here for you. I speak on not as a team of one or just a team of one and two, myself and Ariana, but on an entire board and staff dedicated to helping you be more effective in your philanthropy. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at ebrown@sonomacf.org. Again, that's E like Elizabeth Brown @sonomacf.org with any comments and questions from today's webinar. And I'm happy to answer them, to have a Zoom with you, to put you in touch with the right person on the team, and to follow up with more information from any of the organizations highlighted today, if that will be helpful. So as we launch into Thanksgiving week, we are all thankful for you. And although I know it'll be a different set of circumstances around your family's table, and you might be having a seat there with a computer screen to zoom in some of your families, I do hope it is a special time, that you and your family are healthy and safe, which is a lot to be thankful for right now. So thank you again. I look forward to the chance when we can gather in person. Thank you. Bye.